Here we go. Okay. As always, welcome everybody, Performance School. This is our 22nd Performance School. So it's amazing. We've been continually getting together for a little over a year now. Lucky to have Adam Gahm here. He's an assistant within our Applied Health and Performance Science Department here at Penn State. Really good conversation about predictive performance analysis. And, just kind of thinking about Adam and what he's brought to our department, really appreciate him and respect him from a lot of different angles. So appreciate that. Just a little bit about Performance School, and we say this all the time. Part of a high-performing organization is that we're learning organizations, and that has to do with just continuing to try to get better at our craft, but also understanding what different departments work with. There's an idea within high performance of an interdisciplinary model, and John Fleury brought this up a while back, but when you think about multidisciplinary programs and departments, it's many departments working at their expertise in a certain way, and that's great. But what we want to strive to is an interdisciplinary model where we actually blend things from department to department, and part of that is the appreciation of a lot of different departments. So with that being said, that's kind of where Performance School kind of emerged. We wanted to find ways to learn things, how to change things and innovate things, and then how to share things with the mass. And that's our Penn State ICA community. So with that being said, I will pass it over to Adam. I'll let you share your screen here, Adam. As always, at the 30-minute mark, everyone is free to pop off. This is very informal, but we can stay on also and answer some questions if needed. But without any more time, Adam, you're free to go, brother. Thank you.
How we looking there with the slideshow? Solid? Okay.
Looks good. You just probably have to maximize your screen. There you go.
Yep, got it. All right. First of all, thank you, Nelly, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for hopping on and joining this presentation here. It's going to be a pretty simple. I don't think it'll go the full 30 minutes. We're just going to kind of cover a concept that we've been working on here in the Performance Science Department to kind of help our performance testing decision making, because it can be a pretty challenging process sometimes with the amount of resources we have available to us and the amount of student athletes that we are involved with here on a daily basis at Penn State. So we're going to go over how to kind of simplify that process and try to always basically keep the main thing with our athletes and what we're testing them on. All right, so first kind of concept we're going to cover that kind of lays the groundwork for the rest of the presentation is the idea of predictive validity. So predictive validity is actually something that I believe originated in psychology. And basically what this concept is the degree to which a test score can accurately predict scores on a criterion measure. All right, so that's a very fancy way basically of saying how closely can my scores on one test predict how well I perform in another test. All right, and for us in sports performance, that's going to mean our test scores are our athlete testing protocols or measures that we're going to take. All right, so these can be fitness tests, this can be speed and agility tests, power and strength tests, whether that's in the weight room, on a force plate, on a NORD board, body composition, whatever it is that you're testing with your athletes. And our criterion measure, therefore, is going to be competitive performance. And for our purposes today, we are going to define competitive performance as an athlete's ability to meet or exceed the physical demands of a game. And that's kind of an important part to cover here early on in the presentation, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that any of the performance tests that we run, no matter how sophisticated they are, no matter how close they are to a game demand, none of what we do can perfectly predict the outcome of a game in terms of points scored or wins and losses or anything like that. So competitive performance for us is, again, the ability to meet or exceed the physical demands of the game. So moving on, to put all that in a very, very simple sentence for you is what we're testing accurately predicting performance in competition? And that's the question that we're going to ask ourselves throughout the whole presentation, and what everything kind of works its way back to. So building off of that, it sounds easy enough. Is what we're testing accurately predicting what we can do in competition? But when you think about it, we might have a Whoop band that an athlete might wear that is going to take measurements literally 24/7, and it can be charged without even taking it off. So it can literally be 24/7, 365. It's taking measurements and collecting data. We have velocity-based pieces of training equipment we can use in the weight room. They're going to measure peak power output, peak velocity, average power output of every single rep that an athlete does in the weight room. We have a watt bike that can measure peak power and average power for dozens and dozens of different tests that we run. It can break it down between the left and the right leg. It can break it down between your quad and your hamstring. We have polar heart rate monitors that take, thousands of measurements for every session that you might run with the heart rate monitor on, and all of the further metrics that you can deduce from those measurements. We have catapult GPS devices that, just like the polar, we might come out with tens of thousands of data points for every session that we have the catapult GPS on for. We have force plates that, again, dozens of different tests that you can run on a force plate, all of which are going to give you back, thousands of data points for every athlete, for every rep that they're going to perform on that. We have a Nord board, that same thing. There's a bunch of different tests you can run on that. And I'll break it down by left and right leg, average power or average force, peak force, asymmetries, all that good stuff. And when you look at all of those numbers that you can potentially look at, sometimes you end up looking a lot like this guy in front of a computer monitor, just praying, hoping that the ones that you picked are the right ones and are pertinent to your athletes, to your sport, and what you're trying to accomplish. So our goal here with this presentation, and really just kind of with this concept of organizing everything, is to simplify our decision-making process. We're going to do that by defining our sport's biomotor, biodynamic, and bioenergetic classifications. And from there, we're going to determine our correlating performance tests. That's a very fancy way of saying we're going to ask ourselves two questions. Question number one, what are the physical demands of the game that we're looking at? And question number two, what tests can we perform to predict success in those demands? All right, so at its most basic level, this framework or guidelines is asking ourselves those two questions. Our process for this, it's a 5-step process, basically. First thing we're going to do is we're going to classify our sports into a few different sections that are going to make it easier. Basically, we're going to put all of our sports into different buckets that are very similar based on the demands of the game. From there, we're going to rank or grade the physical demands of those different sporting classifications. And we'll get more in depth into all these steps as we go. Third step is going to be to consolidate all of those demands into a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary demand for each sport classification. We're going to determine our high correlate tests that line up well with those primary, secondary, and tertiary demands of each sport. And then lastly, we're going to integrate it all into one super easy to use flow chart or table that's going to whittle everything down and make the decision-making process really, really simple for each of our sports here. So getting more in depth into our process here, step one, we're going to classify our sports. And I'm going to preface this by saying the way that, at least for this model that we're going to classify our sports, is we are not going to do it based off of specific gameplay parameters per se of the game. So, specific rules of the game, some people break things down by invasion-based games. So that would be like soccer, lacrosse, basketball, stuff like that, or, net and ball games like tennis and volleyball. We're not going to go that route. We're going to bucket our sports based solely, again, on the physical demands of the sport. All right, so ignore specific rules and stuff like that. We're just looking at our physical demands when we break this down. So easiest right off the bat way to break down sports is into team sports and individual sports. That's pretty self-explanatory. Do you compete as a team, or is it more on an individual basis? We're going to further break those two down into a couple subcategories. So for our team sports, we break it down into confined space sports, open space sports, and striking sports. Again, those are pretty self-explanatory. A confined space sport are going to be mostly like your court sports that are going to be in a much smaller area than an open space sport is going to be. So think open space would be like a football or a soccer that's on a really big open field. A confined space sport, maybe something like tennis, where it's much smaller area that you have available to you. Then individual sports kind of get broken down. Those can be a little tough to break down because they are so unique, a lot of them in nature. But we broke them down into racing sports and then very specialty-based sports as well. So then from there, you can really start to throw your sports into these different categories, into very similar demands for each one of these different categories. Again, this is just kind of how we did it. It's very generalized. Everybody might do this a little bit differently. There might be some sports in open space that you think are more confined space, whatever it is. But that's just going to depend on how you look at the sport and maybe how those individual teams go about playing the game. Our next step now is we're going to rank all of the physical demands of those subcategories of sport. All right, so the physical demands that we look at are going to be, number one, energy system demands. All right, so that's pretty simple. Is it an aerobic-based sport? Is it an anaerobic-based sport? Or is it, an anaerobic lactic-based sport? All right, so there's three main energy systems. Which one does this sport rely the most heavily upon? There's obviously a caveat to that all energy systems are going to be used constantly throughout sport, but which one is most pertinent to performance in that sport? We have a strength category. There's all different kinds of ways you can break down strength. It can be relative and absolute strength. It can be maximal and explosive strength. It can be starting strength and reactive strength. But again, which one is going to be most important to game day competition? And then lastly, we have speed demands of a game as well. We break that down into three pretty simple categories as well, into maximal velocity, acceleration, and change of direction, that are pretty self-explanatory. And again, which one is going to help you perform on game day? So we use a ranking system. Again, you can see our sports broken into our different classifications. And then this one is for energy systems. We have the three energy systems in the columns. And it's a very simple system to rank and grade them. Basically, one plus sign is that's going to be the lowest relied upon, I suppose. You could say lowest relied upon quality for that sport. If you have two pluses, that would be kind of in the middle, where it's going to have an impact and it's going to be used, but it is not as important as our quality that's going to get our 3+ sign. So it's very easily 1 through 3 ranking system there. And then we also have down here, you might notice a dash under golf. That would be less than 0. It is a complete non-factor in basically any sporting situation for that sport. So we see, the lactic system here in golf is never, ever going to come into play in that sport. We do the same thing for our strength emphases as well, same ranking system, and then for speed emphases as well. So we take those 3 charts and we're left with a pretty easy to follow, pretty clear ranking of all of our physical demands for each individual sport. And then also we can notice some trends among our categories of sport as well. So we move on from there into our third step, which is going to be to consolidate all of those tables, all of those rankings into one kind of easier to follow table that is going to rank them into, again, three categories of a primary physical demand. So these primary physical demands are our most important physical qualities to in-game performance. All right, these are the number one quality that we should be chasing for this sport. We look at those as high correlation qualities to performance. We'll also have a level for secondary qualities. All right, these are going to definitely contribute to our performance. They're going to have a moderate correlation to in-game performance. They might be something that, you know, every once in a while are going to be used, or they might be qualities that are going to support our primary qualities pretty well. And then lastly, we're going to have our tertiary level. These are going to be the least important qualities. We're not going to spend too much time testing or training these qualities. They have a low correlation to our performance in game. It's not to say that these qualities aren't used or they might not be important for just like general physical fitness or general physical preparation, but when it comes to game day, they are not heavily relied upon in competition. So what that might look like is, again, we have our three kind of bucketed categories of open space, confined space, and striking sports. We have our primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. And all we did was we used the rankings or the gradings that we came up with on the last slide. And now we have a primary level of qualities, we have a secondary level of qualities, and then a tertiary level of qualities. So right now I can look right away, and I know that open space sports are going to be heavy aerobic based sports and also anaerobic based sports as well. In certain instances, they're going to rely on relative explosive strength for in-game performance, and speed base is going to be acceleration and maximal velocity. All right, so it's very simple, very easy to follow. From there, our fourth kind of step in this is we're going to start looking at some of the testing measures and metrics that we might be able to use. They're going to line up with some of those primary demands that we just determined. So again, we're going to break it down into energy systems, strength, and speed qualities. We have our three main energy systems: aerobic, lactic, and anaerobic. And we have just some examples of tests that are going to line up and are going to stress those certain energy systems. These are all tests that we can do on our watt bike in lab. I use that simply because that is, in our department, our primary way of testing energy systems, but you can kind of plug and play any kind of fitness test that you might come up with into these sections. And then to take it one step further, we also have the corresponding metrics that you would pull from the results of those tests that are going to line up, again, with that physical quality. So for the aerobic system, we might run a 3-minute aerobic test on the watt bike, and we can pull out a VO2, an estimated VO2 max from that test, which is a very good measure of the aerobic system. We can do this for strength qualities as well. We do a lot of these are going to relate back to the force plate testing that we do. Again, just because in our department, that is our primary way of testing different strength qualities. So just for example, you might test starting strength with an isometric mid-thigh pull, and the main metrics you're going to look for there are time to peak force and force at certain time intervals. Again, we're going to look at our different speed qualities, and we can come up with different tests and different metrics that are going to relate back to those specific speed qualities that we determined. So now we have, a battery of tests that we have available to us. We know the mode that we're going to test, the equipment we're going to use, and exactly what metrics we can pull out of that are going to line up with our specific physical qualities. So our last step is going to be integrate all of this into one flow chart or one nice, easy to read table. All right, so we go from here on the far left in each section, we have our demand that we have, so endurance, strength, or speed. All right, we're looking at confined space sports here, just for example. We determined what our, our primary and or secondary demands are in those categories. So for confined space, endurance, we determined that aerobic slash anaerobic, so a mixed energy system demand are going to be your primary primary demands there for endurance. And then going back to the last slide, we know that these are the tests and the metrics that we can pull out from those specific tests. So we do that for strength as well. We do that for speed to finish it out. And so now we have this one big flow chart, and then we're going to take it a step further, and we're just going to choose what are our best tests that we want to run. It might be based on what you have available to you. It might be based on team size and ease of test to actually carry out some of these tests. A very small team, it's going to be easier to run a more in-depth test than a very large team with 100 plus athletes with it. So decide which tests are best for you and your situation. And then you're going to be left with one very easy to define. It's going to define your test, and it's going to define exactly what metrics it is that you're going to be looking at to relate back to those specific demands of your game. So went through that pretty quick. Feel like I talked pretty fast, but just to kind of debrief and recap all of that, keep in mind the ultimate goal of all of this. It got probably a little confusing there with all those tables and charts and metrics and all that. Ultimate goal of what we're doing here is we want to provide performance testing that is predictive in nature. So we want our performance testing to always give us some kind of insight into exactly how our athletes and our team is going to handle our game day demands. If we can stick to that and always relate our testing back to that concept, we're going to be in a pretty good spot with our performance testing. How we do that, basically, work backwards from the game, look at the game, determine your physical demands, and take it even one step further. What are our primary demands? What are our most important physical qualities that we can possess? And then what tests can we run to test those physical qualities? And then just some further considerations, things to think about to go along with this concept. Number one is start small and very specific. If you're going to try to implement some of this testing, some of these concepts, think first just primary demands only. Those are going to be your simplest, and they're going to have basically your biggest bang for your buck come game day. If you can track those most important demands and really chase improving those, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. And then after you've kind of nailed down those primary demands, you can start to look in a little bit more into your secondary and tertiary demands as well. Second, always be cognizant of some of the non-physical demands. All right, so go back to kind of our athlete development pyramid that we talk about a lot. On game day, there's going to be a lot of other things that go into your ultimate performance, the ultimate result on game day. Something like your technical ability, your tactical understanding, your mental approach to the game, all going to play as much of a role into your performance as the physical side of things. So basically on game day, if an athlete isn't performing how you want or up to expectations, or they're not able to handle things in a live situation, just be aware that it might not always be just a physical trait that they're lacking. It might be technical, tactical, or mental as well. And lastly, this is just a concept. It's just a framework for some of the things that we do with athletes and performance testing. But it's also something that can be applied in a lot of different areas. I think return to play protocols as well, and always understanding exactly what qualities you need to make sure an athlete is prepared for before you release them back into a full practice or a full competition can be extremely valuable on that front. Practice structure. So just knowing, what an athlete is going to go through on a game day and trying to align our practice structure to possibly improve or expose our athletes to some of those demands as well leading up to competition. I think, I look at strength and conditioning, can use it as well in terms of, physical preparation in the off season and in the preseason to kind of determine what physical qualities they're going to put first, what physical qualities are going to be used to support those primary most important qualities, and what qualities are maybe not so important to develop as well. That's it for me. Thank you to everybody for following along, listening. I hope some of that rambling made a little bit of sense and sparked some interest into how we here in performance science like to look at things and break things down from a performance testing standpoint. And there at the bottom, you can see some further resources. I will say none of this was my original idea or original thought. It all came from different people, mostly from people in the department that I work with every day. So Nellie and John helped me a lot with this. And then some of those people there, there's a couple books down there, a YouTube presentation that I can honestly say I took a lot of this from and just kind of combined different ideas from different people into one kind of easy to use system that works pretty well for us. So that's all I have in terms of a presentation. If anybody has any questions or remarks or anything like that, the floor is yours.
I don't have any questions, but Coach Adam, awesome job. Softball's big fans of Coach Nellie's department, so that was great. Thanks, Coach Adam.
Thank you, Coach Steve.
You have a lot of data out there that can compare from the previous season to these athletes, from freshman year to grow till fourth year, fifth year, whatever, and then also to compare to that, the people that are drafted or are going to move to the professional career, and you can compare. But so you have a data, and these data that the potentially. Okay, so the team sports as an example, and you can compare. May not be exactly, but when you're looking at the games, videos, and these data that help, and that helps sometimes to determine that the change position. I'm sorry, I'm kind of ignorant. But I just my mind in the head is some players that may not be fit to that position, even though he may or she may be playing whole life that position. But then looking at the game and looking at the data compared to others, other players in that previous whatever the data is, to determine that maybe that person may be offense. Maybe switch to defense or whatever. But I'm just curious how that the data to help that individual to maximize the potential to actually do well based upon these data that they use. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is kind of exciting, but just throw at you that how can you use that some different ways to this data to help the athlete.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility to use some of the data that we're able to collect, and especially over like a long term with an athlete to maybe not make that decision, but to better inform that decision. I think it goes back to kind of what I was saying, that the physical demands or the physical qualities are just one small piece of athlete development and athlete success. And their ultimate performance on game day. So I don't think we would ever want to be in a situation where we're making that big of a decision based solely off of, some of the data that we're able to collect. Because there is so much more that goes into, your performance, but it can definitely help to inform some of those decisions and maybe give a little bit better insight or confirm or kind of deny some of the things maybe that we're seeing on game day, and help that situation or help that decision, provide some clarity on that.
Thank you.
Adam, I'm gonna jump in. You can hear me, yes? Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Also, let me put my hand down before someone yells at me. Awesome presentation. Thank you for sharing. I have a question for you because I think it was interesting to see how you kind of divided, especially here at Penn State, we've got 31 sports. So you're dividing it, trying to categorize a lot of these positions and sports. I had one question on the swimming and diving, not considered racing. So there's one asterisk for what, and I'm sure you explained it, and I wasn't listening. But to that, are that, like, to me, you would also then have an additional division, and it would be like football, basketballs, maybe volleyball, specifically here at Penn State, and then all other sports. And I say that with even the staff to player ratio, right? So what would be, they can spend more time with some of these testing aspects that allows them to utilize the whole slide that you had. So I guess I think a piece that could be maybe even, and here specifically, would be how do we utilize still the same amount of resources for the groups that don't have as much staff, or that staff member to player ratio isn't matched up. So would that be an additional piece that we could think about?
Yeah, great question. I knew someone was going to call me out on the swim and dive. I was so in between on that because it is obviously like, it is a race. So it could easily go in that category, but then it is so specialized that it is the only sport.
And
here
they
that
spend
is
how
in the
many
water.
hours training every day? Like about 8.
Yeah,
they're
it's-
always in the water.
So maybe we don't even break down individual sports, and it's just individual sports, one big category. They're all pretty highly specialized as it is. And then to kind of go along with, what you're saying about kind of different levels and staff to player ratios, I probably didn't hammer home enough on that last. It was like one of the last slides, basically. It was like the final flow chart. And basically your decision process for what tests you're going to run, once you have it whittled down to what you should do, and then what you are going to do when you make that decision, it is going to be highly based off of what tests then are going to be the easiest for you to handle and for you to run for your given situation, which things like support staff availability or numbers and coach to athlete ratios are going to play a huge part in that. But I think there is definitely a good option and an easy, kind of easy to implement option for every basically demand that you can come up with. I used very specific and high tech options because we're in the performance science department. So when I think strength testing, I think force plates, I think, watt bike, but there are very simple things that you can do outside of technology that are going to give you the same result and the same insights that are going to be a lot easier to implement for some of those teams as well.
I'll jump in here too, if I can, Adam, maybe from like maybe an administrative lens. One of the things we're always trying to talk about is how we scale services to a large amount of people, thus performance school, having the ability to share information. And that's largely what we think of within a performance unit. Sometimes we get siloed a little bit too much where, hey, I can't jump test because I'm not a performance science person, but if we think about ourselves as performance people, regardless, agnostic of department, then that may break down the walls and open up our ability to actually perform some of the tests that Adam has here. These are not medical tests. These are things that, you could handle within the performance umbrella, regardless of background. So that's just one way as well.
I guess I have a question. Would you ever recommend, I know we're thinking like with our athletes now, but would you ever recommend using, like, I think of our bike testing and force plate testing in a camp setting for recruits? I know like it would be like one data point, but could it potentially show us like, hey, this, I mean, for us junior, like where does she land? Like, is that fair to do on so many levels? Because it's one time that you're probably maybe 2 times out of the year they come back to a camp. And 2, they're also 16 years old, like first time ever running the test. Would that even be like a valid recruiting tool to use?
I think it can be definitely valid. I would be wary of testing, like say you have a camp with 100 athletes. Do we need to test, all 100 athletes? Or can you pick and choose very specific athletes that are number one, great softball players and would be a potential fit for your team? And then possibly using the force plate for further insight into how they are as an athlete. I think the force plate isn't a very, very advanced way of analyzing an athlete that sometimes might not always be necessary. A lot of times you can look at an athlete at camp and just based off of the eye test, you can determine, wow, they're explosive, they're not explosive, they have it, they don't have it, they're what we're looking for. And then from there, you can kind of pick and choose, hey, maybe we want to see exactly how explosive this person is, maybe compared to our current team or compared to, some of the other people in her recruiting class and stuff like that.
Great answer. Thank you, Adam.
What kind of data you can get during the game? What you track the data, probably based upon the team sports. I mean, I say that the team sport in soccer, for example, the heart rate and some distance GPS kind of things. So what kind of data you track during the game for the team sports?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is, if you're looking at soccer, first data point that you're going to look at is goals scored versus goals given up, and then you work backwards from that. But from a performance science standpoint, there would be some things, especially you mentioned like a heart rate monitor that you can look at that might give you some insight into how they're performing physically from a cardio standpoint or an endurance standpoint, like average heart rate, maximal heart rate recovery. So like in between bouts, in between stoppage times during the games, how much their heart rate is able to recover, things like that. You can look at the GPS, things like maximal velocity, high intensity actions, like a count of high intensity actions, and acceleration rate. So you can look at it throughout the game. Is it declining? Are we able to hit certain speeds at the beginning of the game, but not at the end of the game? So a lot of things I would say along those lines.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Adam, this may not be a question, but it may spawn a question. Is just, I love the idea of you're essentially creating a mental model for how to make a decision. So across any walk of life, that's essentially what we're trying to do. But especially in our area, there's so many different things. There's so many things that we could do as coaches. I can train athletes this way. I can test athletes this way. I can recover this way. But I think anytime you can find a way to, reduce down the options and then select things for the exact need, I think that's extremely appropriate. I guess maybe for the group here, are there other things that may go into this that we did not cover, or things that maybe we didn't discuss? As you're making decisions, Coach Crowell, you make decisions on a head coach level every day. Are there any other things that maybe you would add to this, or things from your perspective?
I can't think of any right now. But if I do, let you know. I did like Steph's question though about the recruiting piece of it. I think it's a great question.
Awesome. Well, Adam, man, this was wonderful, and we knew it was going to be. Have a lot of respect for you, and if no one else has anything, really appreciate the time spending this with lunch. You know, we try to do this every other week, and I know everybody's busy, so we do record these, and we'll continue sharing this. You know, at the end of the day, we do want to create a learning organization. You know, things that allow us to integrate across staffs are really huge. And when we integrate and appreciate and work with one another, it really makes us really powerful. So if anybody has anything else, please let us know. And if there's anything we can help you with, let us know. We'll share this recording here once we get it up on YouTube. Adam, thank you. You knocked it out of the park, brother.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody again for hopping on and listening to me ramble a little bit.
Bye,
Awesome.
Adam. Thank you. Thanks, Nelly.
Great job,
Absolutely.
Coach Adam. See you guys. Thank you.
Bye,
Have a
guys.
great day. See y'all. Hannah,
Yes.
hey, how are you?
I'm
don't-
good. How
I
are
don't-
you?
Great. I don't believe we've met. Actually, let me turn off the recording here.
Yeah, yeah.